Odysseus, the genius hero who dreamed up the Trojan horse, won the war, then went on an epic journey home. There's just one problem with that story, because for a man desperate to return to his queen, he had an extraordinary ability to prevent himself from getting there. A whole decade. Piracy, cruising the Med, shacking up with goddesses, fighting monsters, all while managing to lose his entire army and navy in the process. You see, the Odyssey is not just the story of how a war hero got home. It's an allegory of why it took him so long to be ready to get there. But it's also the parallel story of a son growing up without a father, and a wife holding a kingdom together, quite literally by a thread, while everything around her is falling apart. In so many ways, the Odyssey is a timeless story of the human condition, told in a way that only the ancient Greeks can. If you're just a little bit curious about the man behind the myth, the world that shaped him, and why his story has endured for nearly 3,000 years, despite being, well, tortured by the likes of Kirk Douglas, Armand Assante, Ralph Fiennes, Sean Bean, and even that bloke who played the Mummy, and most recently Matt Damon, then grab your sandals, hang on to your loincloth, and join us as we dive into a world of gods, monsters, and heroes, and unpack the deeper story of the Odyssey in a way you've never seen before. If you enjoy our content, please show us some love by liking and sharing with your friends, dropping a comment or two, and by subscribing to the channel. It really does help us grow and reach more people. Check out our socials and website too for additional material, interesting historical nuggets, and news. If you've got some cash to spare and are feeling generous, why not become a Patreon supporter and immortalize your name in the credits of future videos? See the description section for details. Chapter 1. The Age of Man. Our story begins in a world that is both familiar and very far removed from our own. A world of kings and warriors, of long galley ships drawn up on distant shores, and of cities that rise in splendour, wealth, and ambition, and where gods may walk among men in disguise, watching them, testing them, interfering. This is the late Bronze Age Mediterranean, a network of petty kingdoms stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Babylon to Britain, bound together by trade, diplomacy, and the constant movement of people and ideas. Goods travelled vast distances, metals, textiles, and luxury items from one culture to another, and with them stories of exotic places, spirits and monsters lurking at the edges of the known world, as well as the heroes who encountered them. Stories carried by poets, shaped in public performance and passed from one generation to the next, because in this world, memory is everything. There are no books, no written histories as we would understand them. In such a world, to be forgotten is to disappear entirely. It was the end of the age of the demigods, part human, part divine, wielding supernatural skills and abilities to earn their place among the gods. New heroes were now emerging, fully mortal, carving out their own legend through sheer force of will, hard-earned skill, or just plain old cunning. The gods had not disappeared, but something was changing, because for the first time, men were beginning to shape their own fate, and the gods didn't look upon it kindly. You see, for all its growing power and prosperity, the human world rested on foundations that were not as secure as they seemed. Its kingdoms depended on delicate balances of trade, of loyalty, of order and rules agreed upon. For all their confidence, men knew that they were still at the mercy of forces beyond their understanding, and by unseen agents that played by different rules. It is from this world, poised between greatness and uncertainty, that our story emerges, a story shaped not just by imagination, but by memory, by loss, and by a deep awareness of how fragile everything truly is. Chapter 2. The Rules. To understand this fragile world, we must first understand the rules that held it together. There were elemental forces in this world that neither men nor even the gods could escape. Time, fate, and the quiet uncertainty that actions carried consequences. But there were others, not laws as we might think of them, written down and enforced by institutions, but something older, more instinctive, a shared understanding of how one was expected to behave. A principle that governed not how men fought their battles, but how civilization itself was maintained. The Greeks called it Xenia. The British, bless them, pronounce it Xenia, and that's the way I'm going to call it. Xenia was the sacred bond between host and stranger. It was a rigid code of hospitality that demanded generosity, respect, and restraint. A stranger arriving at your door was never to be turned away. He was to be welcomed, fed, protected, and only then could you ask his name, where he came from, and what news he brought. When it was time to leave, there was an exchange of gifts, mementos, and supplies to help them on their way. In return, the guest would offer tribute, behave with dignity, and spread the fame of his host far and wide when he left, because fame, like glory, was currency. This was no mere social convention. It was a sacred duty demanded by Zeus himself. From kings to paupers, nobody was exempt. It was the single most important duty, save those of honouring the gods and one's parents. Because in a world of uncertain travel, of distant lands and unknown intentions, anyone might arrive at your door. A trader, a wanderer, or a god. Neglecting the code of Xenia was an affront to Zeus himself that would be sure to invite disaster. Time and again, it is a pattern that will repeat itself throughout our story. Because in this world, the line between order and chaos is not drawn on battlefields alone, but in the everyday choices men make when faced with the unknown. Choices that could decide your fate. But there was another powerful instinct at work in this culture. The desire not just to live, but to be remembered, to earn a reputation that would endure beyond death itself, to come as close to immortality as a mere human could aspire to. The Greeks called it Kleos. We call it glory. Chapter 3. The Poet and the Story. Stories like these do not survive by accident. They endure because they are told well, refined over time, shaped in performance, and carried across generations by those who understand not just what to say, but how to say it. And at the heart of this tradition, the greatest storyteller of all was Homer. Whether he was a single man, or many voices woven together over time, is a question that has occupied scholars for centuries. What matters is that through him these stories were given form. Not written, not at first, but performed, spoken aloud, sometimes sung, in a specific style practiced for millennia. But this was not simply storytelling, it was memory, sharpened into art, a way of preserving the past while also shaping how that past would be understood and given meaning beyond the events themselves. Now, two great stories would come to define this tradition. The first, a story of war, of pride, conflict, and the pursuit of Kleos, or glory, on the battlefield, a story we know as the Iliad. The second is something very different, not a story of conquest, but of return, of survival, endurance, and the long, uncertain journey home. The most famous example is the story we know simply as the Odyssey. While the heroes of the first sought glory through action, the hero of the second must live with the consequences. War, as the Greeks understood it, was rarely the end of a story. It was often only the beginning of something far more significant. Not every hero who sailed to Troy would return, and for those who did, the journey home was rarely straightforward. Some would find their kingdoms changed, others destroyed. The Greeks had a word for this return, a word that carried with it not just distance, but hardship, uncertainty, and the hope, often fragile, of restoration, renewal, and even redemption. They called it Nostos, from where we get our word nostalgia. And it is here, in this space between victory and return, that the story of Odysseus unfolds, not as the strongest of heroes, nor the most honourable, but perhaps the most enduring. A man defined not by the battles he fought, but by the trials he survived. And, as we will soon see, survival demands a very different kind of hero. Chapter 4. The War That Broke the World. The story of Odysseus does not begin at sea. It begins with a war that would come to define an entire age, and in many ways bring it to an end. For nearly 10 years, the kings of Greece had laid siege to the mighty city of Troy, a city of wealth and reputation, perched at the edge of the known world, controlling the vital passage between east and west. It was a prize worth fighting for, and fight they did, not for days or months, but years. Heroes from across the Greek world gathered there, men whose names would echo through the centuries: Achilles, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and among them Odysseus, a minor king of a tiny island of no real wealth or consequence called Ithaca. He was hardly the strongest nor the most fearsome leader among the Greeks, but it turns out he was perhaps the most resourceful. The details of that war, its battles, its rivalries, its moments of triumph and loss, are stories for another day. What matters for our story is how it ends, not with a final, decisive battle, but with an idea, a deception. A plan so ridiculous, so audacious, that it would bring the city down from within. A great wooden horse, left at the gates of Troy, a parting gift, or so it seemed. Inside, men waiting in silence. Why a horse, you might well ask? A horse was a symbol of raw power, of nobility, honour, sacred to Poseidon and prized by the Trojans, a symbol of devotion that Odysseus knew the enemy would appreciate. The horse was more than just deception. It was psychological manipulation at its best. The Trojans, believing the Greeks had finally given up and the decade-long siege to be over, brought the horse within their walls, and in doing so, sealed their own fate. What followed was not a battle, but an apocalypse. Troy went up in flames, its defences breached from within. Its people scattered as the gates were opened, and an army lying in wait now poured in. For the Trojans, it was all over. But victory is not always what it seems, because in the final moments of Troy, something else took place. Something that would echo far beyond the walls of the city itself. In the chaos that followed, boundaries were crossed, restraint abandoned. Acts were committed, not in the pursuit of victory, but in its aftermath. Among them, an act of desecration, within a sacred space under the protection of the gods. A violation that would not go unanswered. And in that moment, the nature of the victory began to change. Because this was no longer simply a war between men at the amusement of the gods. After 10 years of deprivation, frustration, and failure, the unexpected victory had unleashed a dark side of human nature that the gods had not expected. A crossing of lines that broke not just the laws of nature, but of the divine order that held both men and gods in uneasy balance. The Greeks had won the war and left nothing standing. They destroyed sanctuaries and violated the sanctity of priestesses. Gods on both sides were appalled. There would be consequences. They would not be long in coming. As the chaos settled, the Greek fleet, crammed with treasure and captives, prepared to return home, but many soldiers began to feel uneasy. As the extent of their actions slowly dawned on them, a sense of dread spread among them. And the long journey back, the Nostos each man was craving, began not with triumphal celebrations, but with trepidation. As they hit blue water, the seas did not welcome them. Dark clouds gathered. Winds turned. The less greedy of them had left early and escaped the worst of it. Others, delayed by repairs or ongoing plunder, would not be so lucky, and some would never return at all. As for Odysseus, he was so appalled by the carnage that he publicly called for the punishment of those who were guilty of sacrilege. Surely the gods wouldn't hold him personally responsible. He was just desperate to end the war and go home. But the gods had other ideas. Ships were driven off course. Formations scattered. Many were lost, along with their ill-gotten spoils. Chapter 5. A House Without a King. While Odysseus battles the raging sea far from home, his absence is felt most keenly in the place he longs to return to, Ithaca. It is not a great empire, nor a vast and powerful kingdom. It is a small place, rocky and harsh, less a dominion than a household, held together for many years by the authority and presence of a single man. And now that man is gone. At first there had been patience. Those who remained understood that war was uncertain, that the men who sailed to Troy would not return quickly, and that long absences were to be expected. A year passed, then another. Still there was no word, but neither was there panic. Not yet. But as the years stretched on, and the silence endured, the mood began to shift. The certainty that Odysseus would return gave way to doubt, and doubt, in turn, created opportunity. Men from neighbouring islands began to arrive. They came as nobles, as guests, as men of standing, who could not easily be turned away. At first their presence could be explained. An extended visit, perhaps, or a gesture of solidarity in uncertain times. But as days became weeks and weeks became months, their purpose became clearer. They had not come merely to visit, they had come to stay. And more than that, they had come to claim what they increasingly believed to be an easy opportunity: the house of Odysseus, his wealth, and his palace. Each of these cowards, who had avoided joining the war, now sought to marry his wife, Penelope, and in doing so, secure for himself the position that had been vacant for so long. It is here that the rules of this world begin to show their limits, because these men do not arrive as conquerors. There is no breaking down of doors or seizure of power by force. Instead, they operate within the framework of Xenia, the sacred bond between host and guest. They eat at Odysseus' table, drink his wine, and enjoy the protection that hospitality demands. But what begins as custom gradually becomes exploitation. The line is not crossed in a single moment. It is tested, then ignored, and eventually erased altogether. What was once a house of order becomes something else, its resources consumed, its authority undermined, its structure slowly hollowed out from within. At the centre of it all stands Penelope. It would be easy to imagine her as a passive figure, waiting helplessly for events to resolve themselves. But that would be to misunderstand her entirely. She is, in her own way, as capable and deliberate as the husband she waits for. She understands the situation with perfect clarity. The pressure placed upon her is immense and growing. The expectation is that with Odysseus declared dead, she will choose a new husband, bring closure to uncertainty, and restore a sense of stability to Ithaca. To refuse indefinitely is to invite further disorder. And yet, to concede would be to accept that Odysseus is gone. But that is a conclusion she is not prepared to reach, so instead she delays. Her method is simple but effective. She announces that she will choose a suitor once she has completed a burial shroud for Odysseus' father Laertes, now frail and aging, having long ago abdicated the throne in favour of his son. His time draws near, and it's a task that cannot be dismissed, even in the face of Xenia, and one that carries both duty and respect. By day, she works at it in full view, making steady progress. But by night, she quietly unpicks what she has done, unravelling the fabric thread by thread. In this way, she buys time. And time, in this world, is everything. For years the deception holds. The suitors wait, frustrated but restrained by the appearance of honourable conduct. But eventually, the truth is discovered. The balance shifts again, and the pressure returns, stronger than before. Still, Penelope endures. Not through force, but through understanding. She recognizes the nature of the game being played, and she plays it as well as any of them. But she is not the only one living under this shadow. There is another figure in the house, one whose position is far less secure. Her son, Telemachus. When Odysseus left for Troy, he was a mere infant, too young to remember his father, too young to learn from him, too young to inherit anything beyond his name. Now he stands on the threshold of adulthood, expected to take his place in a world that has offered him no preparation for it. The suitors see him clearly. To them, he is not yet a threat. He lacks authority, experience, and the confidence that comes from having been tested. They mock him, dismiss him, and consume his inheritance in full view, secure in the knowledge that he cannot yet challenge them. And for a time, they are right. Telemachus feels helpless, outnumbered and alone. He has no model to follow, no clear path forward, and no immediate means of asserting control. He exists in a state of tension, caught between what he is and what he is expected to become. But such a state cannot endure indefinitely. The house of Odysseus still stands, but it is no longer secure. Its order is fraying, its authority questioned, its future uncertain, and in the absence of its king, a question begins to take shape, one that can no longer be deferred. If the father does not return, who will take his place? Chapter 6. A Sun Must Rise. For Penelope, the answer has been to endure, to delay, to outmaneuver, to preserve what she can for as long as possible, keeping faith that justice will somehow be done. But for her son, the situation is very different. Telemachus cannot simply wait. In that uncertain space, he finds himself increasingly exposed. The suitors have little reason to take him seriously. To them, he is a whelp, a pup, easily dominated. He has grown up without guidance, without example, and without the presence of the one figure who might have shown him how to act in such a moment. When the time is right, they'll eliminate him. But something is beginning to change. He knows that he must find his voice, and so, for the first time, Telemachus speaks out. He calls an assembly, something that has not been done in Ithaca since his father left for Troy. It is in itself a statement, a reminder that there are still forms, still structures, still expectations that have not entirely disappeared. But calling an assembly is one thing, commanding it is another. When he addresses the gathered men, his words are measured, but they lack the gravitas needed to compel action. He speaks of what is being done in his house, of the strain placed upon his mother, of the injustice of the situation. He appeals to a sense of order, of propriety, of what ought to be. But the response is revealing. There is no denial, simply a deflection. Let Penelope make her choice, and the matter would be resolved. The abuse of Xenia is her fault, not theirs. The assembly ends without resolution. The suitors return to his father's house as they were before, unchecked, unchallenged, and increasingly arrogant. And yet, something has shifted. Telemachus has spoken. However uncertainly, however imperfectly, he has stepped forward, and that step, once taken, cannot easily be undone. It is at this point that another influence enters the story. A figure appears, at first in the guise of a trusted family friend, offering counsel where none has been available. The advice is simple, but significant. If Telemachus wishes to understand what has become of his father, he must go beyond Ithaca. He must seek out those who fought beside him, those who returned, those who might know something of his fate. It requires of Telemachus to do something he has not yet done, to act independently, to leave the confines of his home and step into a wider world. With the quiet assistance of the goddess Athena in disguise, he prepares to depart. The journey that follows is not one of monsters or immediate danger, but of education. Telemachus travels first to the court of Nestor, one of the elder statesmen of the Trojan War, a man whose experience and longevity command respect. There, he learns not only fragments of what befell the Greeks on their return, but something equally important: how a leader carries himself, how authority is expressed, how memory is preserved and honoured. But Nestor has no news to share, so he assigns his own son to accompany Telemachus further afield. From there, the lads journey on to Sparta, to the court of Menelaus, the man who instigated the war to rescue his abducted wife Helen. Mighty King Menelaus, victorious, but whose own return from Troy had been long and uncertain. Here, the world appears very different from Ithaca. Order has been restored, his wife once again by his side. Wealth and stability are evident. It is in many ways a glimpse of what successful Nostos can look like. But even here the past lingers. Stories are told, losses recounted. The war, though finished, continues to shape the lives of those who survived it. And in these accounts, Telemachus hears, perhaps for the first time in any real sense, of his father. Not as a distant figure, but as a man among men, clever, resilient, a hero, well remembered. It is not certainty he gains from these travels, but perspective. Telemachus begins to understand that the world is larger than Ithaca, that his father's story is part of something greater, and that his own place within it is not fixed, but must be claimed. By the time he turns homeward, he has seen what real kings are made of. He has taken the first steps, and in doing so, he has begun a journey of his own. Chapter 7. The First Mistake. As the storm unleashed its fury, Odysseus' small flotilla of 12 ships was blown far to the north. Everyone knew that sudden squalls such as this were out of season. It was no coincidence. Thankfully, none of his crew were lost. That was a good omen despite the gloom. When the tempest finally subsided, they came ashore in the land of the Cicones, a land of wealth and opportunity on the Thracian coast. Conditioned by years of privation and war, it didn't even occur to them to formally seek refuge from its ruler. By now, the entire world would have learned what they had done in Troy. Odysseus was taking no chances. The Cicones were allies of the Trojans after all. Besides, the Ithacans had the numbers, so his men launched a lightning raid on the capital, Ismarus. But Odysseus was uneasy. The recent storm was still troubling him, so he did his best to restrain the men and then urged a hasty departure. They had acquired all they needed and more, but his second-in-command, his brother-in-law Eurylochus, told him to relax. The men were on edge. They needed to blow off some steam. Against his better judgment, Odysseus relented. Before long, there was lamb on the spit. The ladies were choice, and the wine was the best in Thrace. But it just didn't feel right. A patrol soon captured the local prince, a priest in the temple of Apollo, and they were about to dispatch him when Odysseus intervened and set him free. There would be no sacrilege on his watch. In gratitude, the prince gifted him a skin of famous Ismarian wine, said to be so potent it needed to be watered down 20 parts to 1, or it would knock you out cold. Indeed, it was delicious, and Odysseus had it stowed aboard his flagship. The men now settled into successive nights of feasting, drinking and carousing, oblivious to the fact that a number of locals had in the meantime fled to outlying towns, and by the third day had assembled a large force of soldiers that now threw themselves upon the unsuspecting Ithacans. In a desperate fighting retreat, they boarded their ships, losing over 70 men in the battle, a fifth of their entire number, as they rowed back out to sea. It was a near disaster that could have been avoided had Odysseus just followed his instincts. But the men had become hard to control, especially after years of deprivation. Getting them home alive would take more than instinct. It would take discipline, restraint, and leadership. The Cicones debacle was a lesson in the deception of easy wins. For a man whose entire reputation was based on his own skill in deception, the gods were settling in to show that the joke would soon be on him. Hold that thought. Chapter 8. The Lotus Eaters. As if the warning had not already been made clear, another storm now gathered on the horizon. This time, it struck with a force even seasoned Ithacan sailors struggled to withstand, tearing into the fleet without warning and tossing them about for almost 2 weeks. When it was over, it was a small miracle that not a single ship had been lost, though many were now in desperate need of repair. As land appeared on the horizon once again, the priority would be maintenance, not raiding. Coming ashore, they saw no walls, no guard towers, no great city. This time Odysseus would send out a delegation to seek assistance. When they failed to return, he began to worry and set out himself to see what had happened. He encountered people who seemed to live without concern, without urgency. Friendly and generous, they offered him a peculiar fruit to eat they called the lotus. Brushing them off, he pressed on and soon stumbled across his own men, just lying about, laughing, as though they had been drugged. The lotus was offered freely, a gesture of welcome, a simple act of hospitality, and those who tasted it found themselves changed. They seemed to quickly lose interest in everything, their responsibilities, cares, and worries. The place was like a Bronze Age hippie commune. Worst of all, his men had lost the desire to return home. There was no pain here, no struggle, only a quiet contentment that asked nothing and offered bliss. For those who had endured years of war, one piece of fruit changed everything. But Odysseus saw the danger immediately. This was not rest, it was surrender. There was something sinister about it. And so he acted. Returning with help, the men who had eaten the lotus were taken back to the ships by force, not persuaded, but compelled. Some needed to be bound, so desperate were they to stay. It was a harsh decision, but a necessary one. They would have to make repairs elsewhere, because left to their own will, they would not have left at all. And with that, the ships departed. No battles fought, no victory claimed, and yet something important had been revealed, that not all dangers announce themselves, that not all threats come with violence. Some arrive quietly, offering comfort, ease, and the chance to forget who you are. Numbness. It would not be the last time Odysseus faced such a strange choice, but for now the lesson was clear. Numbness was a type of deception too. The journey home could be lost long before it ever truly begins. Chapter 9. The Cyclops. Their next landfall was a small island rich in fresh water and wild goats, which they hunted and soon restocked their larders. But across from the island lay a coastline that was unlike any they had seen before, rugged, untamed, and largely untouched by the kind of order they had come to expect. No harbours filled with ships, no cities, no sign of structured society. Some believe it was the southern shore of Sicily. Here lived a people known as the Cyclopes, great solitary beings, each dwelling alone, owing allegiance to no king, and bound by no shared law or religious devotion, no assemblies, no codes of conduct, no sense of obligation to anyone beyond themselves. We might say it was a Neolithic lifestyle, barely out of the Stone Age, primitive and isolated. It was, in many ways, the very opposite of the organized world Odysseus understood. And yet, it was precisely this difference that drew him in. Telling the rest of his crew to remain on the island, he took 12 volunteers and rowed across to the mainland to see for himself what these people were actually like. Odysseus was nothing if not curious. Spotting a cave set back from the shore, well stocked with provisions, they chose to investigate and made their way up the cliff face. Isolated as it was, surely the inhabitants understood the customs of Xenia: food, shelter, gifts and stories exchanged in good faith. But the host was nowhere to be found. So, tired and hungry, they made themselves comfortable and waited for his return to pay their respects. But this was not that kind of world. The cave belonged to a single inhabitant, a creature of immense size and strength, known as Polyphemus, a Cyclops. And his ways were not the ways of ordinary men. When he finally showed up, at first he completely ignored his visitors. No offer of a bath, clothes, food, shelter, or protection. He just carried on tending to his sheep and goats. Puzzled, Odysseus stepped forward to introduce himself. Polyphemus simply turned and sealed the entrance to the cave, with a stone so vast that no man could hope to move it. And then he grabbed 2 of Odysseus' men, squashed them and ate them, whole, washing down the entire grisly meal with a bucket of fresh goat's milk, before snatching another 2 men for dessert. Then he simply plonked himself down and fell asleep. Odysseus and his men recoiled, stunned. What to do? In that moment, Odysseus understood the truth of where he was. They had become victims of a world without Xenia, without the shared rules that made civilization possible, and this time, if they were to survive, it would not be through force. There was no way they could overpower the giant. A sword would barely scratch him. There had to be another way. By morning, surely an answer would come to him. So they spent an anxious night huddled and waiting. As dawn broke, the lumbering giant awoke and again, completely ignoring the visitors, set about milking his sheep, then opening the cave to take them out to pasture, rolling back the stone behind him, once again sealing the visitors in without so much as a word. Odysseus assured his men he had a plan, and got busy sharpening the end of an enormous wooden post that was leaning against the wall of the cave. When the Cyclops eventually returned, the entrance was again sealed, before snatching yet another 2 sailors as a snack. All this without ever saying so much as a word. By now, Odysseus was as annoyed as he was sickened, and he chastened the Cyclops for his disgraceful lack of hospitality, reminding him that Zeus himself demanded courtesy. Despite his host's poor behaviour, Odysseus would honour his own duty by offering a skin of wine to the brute to accompany the heartbreaking feast he had made of his 2 companions. He presented the Cyclops his entire skin of Ismarian wine, undiluted. The Cyclops snatched and guzzled goblet after goblet. Amazed at its quality, he now finally asked Odysseus for his name and promised him a gift in return if he told him where the wine was from. "My parents and friends call me Nothing," said Odysseus. "Nothing? What a ridiculous name," thought the giant, swigging down yet another goblet, before drawing a wry smile and telling him his gift was that he would be the last to get eaten. But the wine soon kicked in. Sure enough, within a few minutes, the enormous hulk was on his back and snoring loudly. The visitors climbed onto the slumbering giant and rammed the wooden post straight into his solitary eyeball. The Cyclops wailed in pain, such that other giants soon gathered outside to see what the commotion was about. "It's nobody's treachery that's caused me injury. Nobody's trying to kill me," he screamed. "Well, go back to sleep then, you idiot," or some such reply came from the neighbours gathered outside. Drunkenness seemed to be common among the Cyclopes. Eventually, exhausted and still completely tanked, Polyphemus fell asleep again. Odysseus now moved to secure with ropes his remaining crew under the bellies of the sheep that were in their pens. He knew that when the Cyclops let them out in the morning, he would feel their backs to make sure the miscreants weren't going to rodeo their way out. Instead, Odysseus and his men exited the cave like possums hanging onto their mamas. I know, not exactly escape from Alcatraz, but it was the Bronze Age. Just roll with it. Anyway, as they detached from their ovine belly ride and made their way back to the ship, Odysseus couldn't help himself. He looked back at the Cyclops on the hillside and yelled out to him, "Oi!" or "Yasu." I don't know, whatever the Greeks said back then. "You've got your fair punishment now, haven't you, you great oaf?" Enraged, the Cyclops picked up a boulder from the cliff edge and hurled it towards the Sound, barely missing the boat and causing an enormous wave. But Odysseus, shaking off his comrades, who were desperately trying to shut him up, went on. "If anyone asks you who outsmarted and blinded you today, tell them it was Odysseus of Ithaca, destroyer of cities, son of Laertes the king. He was having his Kleos moment, and nobody, no one, was going to talk him out of it." Well, Polyphemus the Cyclops suddenly got all righteous, calling down the fury of his father, the god Poseidon, to rain punishment down on this puny upstart and his crew. He called on Dad to never allow Odysseus to return home to Ithaca, but, if he should do so, to delay it by years, tormented and in rags, having lost all his comrades and ships, and only to find his home in turmoil. Yeah, that's what happens when you shoot your mouth off, even in the Bronze Age. And with that, the sea itself now had reason to shadow him. Now, it's fair to say the crew were not happy, but they rowed their way out to sea, barely dodging boulders thrown by the son of the sea god himself. Superstitious as they were, they knew things were about to get complicated. Chapter 10. The Winds of Aeolus. For a time, it seemed as though fortune had returned to Odysseus' side. The ships sailed on, leaving the dangers of the Cyclops far behind them, and ahead, at last, lay the possibility of home. Their next destination was the mysterious floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, thought by some to be the volcanic island of Stromboli. Unlike the wild places they had encountered before, this was finally a place of order, a realm where forces that elsewhere ran free were carefully contained. They had to be. And here Odysseus was received not as an intruder, but as a guest, welcomed, fed, honoured. Xenia, properly observed. For a full month he remained, telling his story, sharing the trials of the war and the journey that had followed. And when it was time to leave, Aeolus did something remarkable. He gathered the winds of the world and bound them within a single bag, all but one, the one that would carry Odysseus home. It was a gift of immense value. Not wealth, not power, but something far rarer: direction. With it, the journey that had already taken so much time could be brought to a swift conclusion. And so they set sail. For 9 days the ships moved steadily forward. The winds held. The course was true. And then, at last, land appeared on the horizon. Ithaca. Home. So close that the fires on its shores could be seen. And for the first time since leaving Troy, Odysseus now allowed himself some real rest. He slept. It was a small thing, a human thing. But in that moment, everything changed. Because while he slept, the men who had travelled with him began to wonder. What was in the bag? Why had their leader kept it so close? Why didn't they get one? Why wasn't he sharing his bounty with them? Suspicion grew, quietly but steadily. Perhaps it was treasure, gold, silver, jewels of immense value. After all they had endured, was it so unreasonable to expect a share? And so, while he was sleeping, they opened it. The winds were released all at once. Violent, uncontrolled, and catastrophic. So close to shore, the ships were now driven back, torn from the sight of home, and cast once again into the open sea. Ithaca vanished behind them. Not by fate, not by the will of the gods, but by human resentment. When Odysseus awoke, it was already too late. The bag was empty, and they were back at Aeolia. He disembarked, hoping to explain what had happened and to ask for aid. But this time it was different. There was no welcome, no hospitality, no gift. It was clear to the Aeolians that this was no ordinary accident. To bungle so generous a gift was a serious breach of responsibility. It indicated deliberate divine intervention. To assist anyone under such disfavour would surely bring misfortune onto themselves too. The rules of Xenia had limits that one had to be careful to interpret. So they were turned away and cast back into the world with nothing. It is a moment easily overlooked. No monster, no battle, and yet it reveals something essential. The greatest obstacles Odysseus faces are not always external, that even the best plan and even the most favourable conditions can be undone by mistrust, by doubt, by the quiet fracture between a leader and the men he must rely upon, by being too casual with your leadership. Chapter 11. The Laestrigonians. After their rejection by Aeolus, Odysseus and his men were cast once more into uncertainty. The winds no longer guided them, and whatever sense of direction they had possessed seemed to dissolve with them. What followed was not a single great trial, but a slow and wearying drift from one unknown shore to another. After a week at sea, they came upon a land that, at first glance, seemed promising. Now, before all you armchair archaeologists get your loincloths in a knot, I'm going to address the question of disputed locations for some of these places in a supplementary chapter at the end of the video. For the sake of stylistic convenience, I'm arranging their placement according to a recent trans-Mediterranean theory That is certainly not without its own flaws. You're welcome to have your own Kleos moment by contributing your thoughts in the comments section. For now, just roll with me until the supplementary chapter. It was sheltered, orderly even. A harbour lay ahead, narrow at its entrance, but opening into a calm, enclosed basin within. Steep cliffs rose on either side, offering protection from the open sea. For sailors long at the mercy of wind and weather, it must have seemed like an ideal refuge. Without consulting their leader, the other captains simply made straight for the harbour. But Odysseus, unsure of their reception, took his own ship to the far shore and sent out a delegation to contact the local chief, while he himself climbed up onto a rocky outcrop to observe his other ships now at anchor in the narrow harbour. The messengers encountered a figure who seemed human enough and were directed inland toward what appeared to be a settlement. There was no immediate sign of danger, no hostility, no warning that anything was amiss. But this, as it turned out, was not a civilized land in any familiar sense. The people who lived here were the Laestrigonians, a race of people renowned for their immense strength, but, like the Cyclops, living without the structures or customs that governed the Greek world. There were no shared rules here, no expectation of hospitality, no recognition of the obligations that bound host and guest. Still, he thought it was worth reaching out. But whatever resemblance they bore to ordinary people ended the moment contact was made. What followed was swift and utterly devastating. The scouting party did not return. Instead, the inhabitants descended upon the harbour itself, moving with a speed and force that left little time for reaction. From the cliffs above, massive projectiles were hurled down upon the trapped ships below. Vessels were shattered where they lay, unable to manoeuvre within the confined space. Oars splintered, hulls broken, crews overwhelmed before they could even organise a defence. It was not a battle, it was a demolition. Worse still, the inhabitants were cannibals, who quickly set about their grisly business, dragging the hapless Ithacans ashore to their doom. From his position outside, Odysseus saw what was happening. There was nothing he could do to intervene, and now he heard shouts and voices coming towards him. Cutting his own moorings, he ordered his crew to row with everything they had, pulling away from the shoreline before the attackers could reach them. It was not going to be a heroic stand, nor a moment for strategy. It was a decision made in an instant, to flee and to preserve what little remained. By the time they were in open water, it was all over. Of the squadron that had left Troy, only a single ship and a handful of crew remained. And this time, there was no ambiguity about where the responsibility lay. There had been no storm, no divine intervention, only a choice, to enter a place that appeared safe without understanding it. Odysseus, a man renowned for his deception at Troy, was fast becoming the victim of the very art he himself was a master of. It was like some kind of gruesome cosmic joke. This was no longer an expedition, it was a scramble for survival. Chapter 12. Circe. After the destruction at the hands of the Laestrigonians, the tone of the journey changes. The sudden violence of that encounter gives way to something quieter, but no less dangerous. With only a single ship remaining, Odysseus and his dwindling company arrive at the island of Aeolus, a place that seems, at first, untouched by the chaos they have endured. It is a landscape of dense forests and open clearings, where smoke can be seen rising in the distance, evidence of habitation, and perhaps of safety. But by now Odysseus has learned to be prudent. Rather than rush blindly forward, he divides his remaining men into two groups, keeping one with him while sending the other to explore. The party that ventures inland soon comes upon a dwelling, solid, well built, and strangely inviting. Around it roam an assortment of strange animals, wolves and lions, but not as one would expect. They behave almost like domestic animals, approaching the men with a calmness and playfulness that is deeply unsettling. From within the house they hear the melodic sounds of a woman's voice singing. Spoiler alert! In Greek myths, this usually means trouble. Anyway, inside the house, they find an appropriately beautiful mistress. Elegant, self-assured, in complete control of her surroundings. Her name is Circe, the daughter of the sun god Helios. She welcomes them without hesitation, offers food and drink, speaks gently, soothingly, beckoning them to sit at table. And for men who have known only hardship, loss, and uncertainty, the invitation is difficult to refuse. But, once again, what is offered freely is rarely what it seems. After all, Xenia. The moment they accept her hospitality, the nature of the encounter changes. The food and drink have been laced with something unseen, something that strips them of their awareness, their resistance, their identity. And with a gesture she transforms them. The men's bodies begin changing, contorting. Their eyes betray their terror as they transform into hogs, hairy, smelly, and, let's face it, delicious pigs. She shoos them outside. It is a complete reversal of everything that defines them. Strength, discipline, purpose, gone. In their place, something more instinctive, base, and now completely submissive. Only one man escapes, Odysseus' ever-contrarian brother-in-law Eurylochus, who, sensing a trap, had remained outside. He runs back to Odysseus with the news, shaken and uncertain of how to even describe what he has witnessed. And here, once again, Odysseus is faced with a choice, to turn away or to confront what lies ahead. The loss of so many men so recently still haunts him. He can't just turn and run again, so this time he chooses to go forward, but alone. And yet, before he reaches the house, he is intercepted. A figure appears, unexpected but not unwelcome, a guide of sorts, one who understands the nature of the threat he is about to face. It is the god Hermes, apparently Odysseus' own great-grandfather, though as you look at him, he appears more like a teenager. It's complicated. Anyway, he offers Odysseus something rare in this journey: preparation. A herb, which, when chewed, will protect him from Circe's influence. And then he gives him simple instruction to accept her offer of hospitality, to wait for the right moment, and then to act. Armed with this knowledge, Odysseus enters the house. Circe greets him as she did the others, offers him food, wine. The same deceptive ritual. But this time, nothing happens. For the first time, her power fails. Odysseus leaps across the room and pins her with his sword, making her promise upon the gods that she will not try to trick or trap him, but will render all care and assistance. She gives her word, and then, gives herself, if you know what I mean. What follows is one of the more curious episodes in the journey, because, having overcome the danger, having secured the release of his men, Having achieved in every sense what he set out to do on the island, Odysseus stays, not for days, but for an entire year. It is a pause in the journey that raises an obvious question, one we have already begun to encounter. If his desire to return home is so strong, why does he remain? The answer is not simple. Circe offers no threat now, no deception. What she provides is comfort, stability, and a kind of order that has been absent from their lives for a very long time. After everything they have endured, the temptation to remain, to delay the uncertainty of what lies ahead, is powerful. And that's what makes it dangerous. A journey is not always lost through failure. Sometimes it is just set aside, in favour of something easier to endure. And Odysseus, for all his discipline, is not immune to it. But more than that, he's also increasingly facing the dread of the curse of the Cyclops, and what it means for his remaining men, and his family. That an act of selfish glory carried real consequences for others. With the Lotus, the danger had been the loss of memory, an involuntary numbness. Here the danger was something subtler. No amnesia, but an intentional decision to delay. Neglect by consent. If I was to invoke the immortal storyteller J.R.R. Tolkien, he might say it this way: not all who lose their way have forgotten where they are going. But eventually, it is his own men who are stirred by homesickness. They remind Odysseus of their mission, that their Nostos isn't yet over. This time, it's they who are motivating him, and it's probably just as well. How do you tear yourself away from a goddess, particularly one who also happens to be a sorceress? Time is passing. The journey is unfinished, but our hero eventually snaps out of it, and once again he prepares to leave. But by now, Circe has given birth to a son, Agrius, another child he is forced to leave behind for the sake of a long journey. I told you, Greeks are complicated. Anyway, despite being heartbroken, she keeps her promise of support and guidance. Circe tells him there's only one way to find an answer on how to placate Poseidon and be released from the curse. He must do something no mortal willingly chooses. He must seek answers from the world below. Chapter 13. The Underworld. When Odysseus leaves the island, he does so not in pursuit of land, or safety, or even home in any immediate sense, but in search of something far less tangible: knowledge. The instruction he has been given is precise, but unsettling. If he wishes to return, he must first seek counsel from the dead, from those who have passed beyond the world of the living, and who alone can reveal what lies ahead. It is a task not undertaken lightly. In the world Odysseus inhabits, the boundary between the living and the dead is not meant to be crossed. The dead are remembered, honoured, and, when necessary, feared. But they are not approached directly. To do so is to step outside the natural order, to enter a realm governed by an entirely different set of rules. And yet, this is what is now required of him. Guided by Circe's instructions, Odysseus sails to the edge of the known world, to a place where the boundary between life and death grows thin. There he performs the necessary rites and offerings, calling forth the spirits of those who have passed on, offering them what is needed to draw them from the shadows. What follows is not a descent in the physical sense, but an encounter, a meeting point between worlds. The first figure to emerge from the depths is not one he seeks. It is a companion. Elpenor, one of his own men who had died not in battle nor in some great act of heroism, but through accident, slipping from the roof of Circe's house and falling to his death on the very morning they were set to depart, left behind, unburied, overlooked in the excitement of departure. Nobody had noticed that he was missing. His presence is a reminder of something easily overlooked in the journey so far. That not all losses are dramatic. Some are quiet, unnoticed, and yet no less real. Elpenor asks for nothing more than recognition, a proper burial, a restoration of dignity in death. It is a simple request, but one that carries weight. Even here, in the realm beyond life, the obligations of the living remain. Odysseus swears to make it right. Only after this encounter does Odysseus meet the figure he has come to find, the seer Tiresias. It is from him that Odysseus receives what he has sought, an understanding of the path ahead. The journey will not be simple, nor will it end quickly. There are dangers still to come, choices yet to be made, and consequences that cannot be avoided. But more than this, Tiresias offers a warning that survival alone will not be enough, that restraint, discipline, and the ability to recognize limits will determine whether the journey succeeds or fails. It is not a prophecy of certainty, it is a framework of possibility, one that depends in part on Odysseus himself. And even if he succeeds, he'll still have to make it up to Poseidon. But Tiresias is not the only encounter that shapes this moment. As more spirits begin to gather, Odysseus comes face to face with figures from his past, men who fought beside him, leaders whose fates have already been decided, and whose stories now serve as reflections of what may yet come. Among them is Agamemnon, once the commander of the Greek forces at Troy. His return home, long awaited and hard won, did not end in restoration, but in tragedy. Betrayed upon his arrival, his fate stands as a warning that reaching home is not the same as reclaiming it. And then there is a meeting of a different kind. Odysseus encounters Achilles, the greatest warrior of the war, a figure whose pursuit of glory defined an entire generation. In life, Achilles had chosen a short existence filled with fame over a long, unremarkable one. Here, in death, that choice is seen from another perspective. The glory remains, but the man does not celebrate it. What was once sought above all else now appears diminished when measured against the simple fact of living. The great Achilles tells us that, given the choice again, he would rather be a poor farmer, living, though it be in obscurity. It is a moment that reframes everything the heroic world claims to value. A confrontation with the values that have shaped his own decisions, the desire to be remembered, to be known, to leave behind an epic legacy. In this place, those ambitions are placed in a very different light. The most dramatic shade he encounters is that of his mother, Anticlea, who had died in his absence. Odysseus had left Ithaca believing she would still be there when he returned. There had been no final farewell, no sense that their parting would be permanent, and yet here she was, among the dead, her presence forcing him to confront something he had not fully considered. Time had not stood still in his absence. When he speaks to her, the questions are immediate, almost urgent. What had happened? How had she come to be here? What had become of his father, his wife, his home? Her answers are not dramatic, but they are devastating in their simplicity. She had not died in battle, nor from illness, nor through any sudden misfortune. She had died from grief, from waiting for a son who did not return. It is a different kind of loss from those Odysseus has witnessed so far. There is no violence in it, no moment of crisis, no single event that defines it. It is the slow erosion of hope, the wearing down of expectation over time, until nothing remains. For Odysseus, this is not a lesson about the dangers ahead. It is a revelation about what has already been lost. The journey he has been struggling to complete is no longer simply about reaching home. It is about what remains when he arrives. He tries to embrace her, but she slips through his fingers. It is a moment that makes clear, more than anything else he has encountered, the finality of death, and the distance that now separates him from what he once knew. In all the trials he has faced, in all the dangers he has survived, this is perhaps the most human of them. There is no strategy here, no solution. Only the recognition that some things cannot be undone. Eventually, Odysseus withdraws. The rites are concluded, the boundary reasserted, and the ship once again turns back toward the world of the living. But he does not leave unchanged. He leaves with perspective. Chapter 14. The Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis. The party set sail back to Circe's island, to bury their forgotten companion as promised, and then discuss the way forward. The task completed, when Odysseus leaves the island of Circe for a second time, she leans in and tells him something else he didn't know. She's pregnant again. Another boy. I told you, it's complicated. Anyway, at least he leaves with something he has not possessed before: foreknowledge. He knows, at least in part, what lies ahead. The dangers have been named, their nature explained, and the path through them, however narrow, has been described. It is a rare advantage in a journey defined by uncertainty. But it is also a burden, because to know what is coming is not the same as being able to avoid it. The first of these dangers appears not as a visible threat, but as a voice. The Sirens. They do not attack, nor do they pursue. They do not force themselves upon those who pass by. Instead, they offer something far more difficult to resist: understanding. Their song was said to promise secret knowledge of the past, of the present, of all things that have been and might yet be known. For a man like Odysseus, whose insatiable curiosity has occasionally led to catastrophe, this journey has increasingly become one of interpretation as much as survival, so the appeal is obvious. To hear such knowledge would be to possess something beyond mere endurance. But the cost is equally clear. Those who yield to the song do not leave. They are inevitably drawn to them, hypnotized and dying of starvation, rather than leave the island of the Sirens. Forewarned by Circe, Odysseus prepares. He orders his men to seal their own ears with wax, removing from them the possibility of choice. Now they will not hear the song, and therefore cannot be drawn toward it. It is a simple solution and an effective one. But for himself, he chooses differently. He wants to hear it. Of course he does. And so he has himself bound to the mast of the ship, instructing his men that no matter what he says, no matter how he pleads, they are not to release him. It is Odysseus at his audacious best, a decision to experience temptation while avoiding the consequences. Naughty boy. As the ship passes, the song reaches him. It offers exactly what it promises: not illusion, not deception, but insight, an invitation to understand everything that has shaped his journey, everything that lies behind him and everything that might lie ahead. And for a moment, it works. He strains against his bonds, calling out, demanding to be released, compelled not by ignorance, but by the desire to know more. But the ropes hold. His men ignore him. The ship continues, and the moment passes. It is a rare kind of victory for Odysseus, but knowledge itself is a burden. The wisest of kings would someday say that knowledge is laden with sorrow. And yet, as they sail on, what follows now offers no such clarity. Beyond the Sirens lies a passage that cannot be avoided. On one side, Scylla, a horrendous creature with 6 heads and ravenous fangs, dwells in the rock, striking without warning, taking what she can from those who pass too close. The story goes that she was once a beautiful nymph, in love with the same god as Circe. Circe was not one for sharing, and in her jealousy transformed her opponent into the monster she now was. Oof. On the other side, Charybdis, a force of the sea itself, drawing everything downward in a violent and inescapable vortex. Thought by some to be within the Straits of Messina, even today eddies and dangerous currents require careful navigation. There is no safe route, only a choice between losses. Odysseus has been told what must be done, to steer closer to Scylla. He knows her 6 ferocious heads will snatch 6 of his crew while the ship sails past. But the alternative side will see them all perish in the vortex of Charybdis, that sucks ships down, then spits the remains of the shattered vessels back out again. It is the heartbreaking choice of any leader, to accept a limited loss rather than risk total destruction. As they approach, the tension is not one of uncertainty, but of inevitability. Odysseus knows what will happen. He knows that some of his men will be taken, and that there is nothing he can do to prevent it. Not through strength, not through cunning, not through will. He keeps his anxiety to himself to avoid all-out panic. When the moment comes, it is as sudden as it is final. Scylla strikes from above, taking men from the ship before any defence can be mounted. There is no time to react, no opportunity to fight back. The loss is immediate and irreversible. The ship moves on, because it must. There is no pause for grief, no space to recover what has been taken. The alternative, to turn towards Charybdis, would be to lose everything. And so the choice stands, to continue, having sacrificed some in order to save the rest. It is here that the journey takes on a different character. Until now, Odysseus has faced challenges that could be overcome through intelligence, restraint, or force. Even failure has carried with it the possibility of correction, of learning, of doing better next time. But this is different. This is a situation in which there is no ideal outcome. To paraphrase another hero from another story, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. For Odysseus, this is not simply another trial. It is a confrontation with the limits of control. The path home is still ahead, but it is becoming clearer that it will not be completed without further sacrifice. Chapter 15. The Cattle of Helios. After passing the straits of Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus and his remaining men emerge into calmer waters, but not into safety. The dangers behind them have taken their toll, and what remains of the crew is now smaller, more strained, and increasingly difficult to hold together. It is here that the next stage of the journey is defined not by uncertainty, but by clarity. Odysseus has been given a direct warning. He has been told, in precise terms, what lies ahead, and what must not be done. There is an island they will come upon, sacred to the sun god Helios, where his cattle graze. They are not to be harmed, not even touched. The entire island is best avoided. The instruction is simple, and the consequences, should it be ignored, are equally clear. But the ship was in need of repairs, and the men were aching and tired after their ordeal. Eurylochus, oppositional as usual, whips the grieving men up into a near mutiny, pressing Odysseus to beach the ship and let them rest. They were grieving their lost friends and clearly distraught, so, again, despite his better judgment, Odysseus relents. When they arrive at the island, the situation at first appears manageable. The cattle indeed are there, just as described, untended, unguarded, moving freely across the land. The place looks serene. But Odysseus understands the significance. This is not a test of strength nor of cunning. It is a test of restraint. He gathers his men and makes the command explicit. Under no circumstances are they so much to even touch the cattle. Whatever hardships they face, whatever happens, this is the line that must not be crossed. And for a time the order holds. But the world, as it has done before, begins to work against them. The winds shift, a storm rises, and the ship is held in place. Days pass, then more. Provisions begin to run low. The situation changes from manageable to difficult, and then from difficult to desperate. Hunger has a way of altering judgment. To men with empty bellies, the sight of all those plump, juicy cattle is excruciating. They begin to question not the truth of what they were told, but the necessity of obeying it under these conditions. Odysseus, recognizing the danger and increasingly under siege, withdraws for a time to pray and seek guidance. But in his absence, the balance shifts. Good old Eurylochus gathers the crew. As usual, he reframes the situation his own way. Yes, they'd be breaking a sacred order, but the alternative is to die of starvation. Surely no good could come of that. Instead, he promises they take a cow, and to compensate, sacrifices can be made, reparations offered, promises sworn to build temples to Helios once they got home, as a sign of penance and honour. Surely the god would accept that offering. It's win-win after all. A persuasive argument. The cattle are taken. This act is deliberate, not accidental. It is not done in ignorance, but in full awareness of what is forbidden, twisted to suit their own narrative. Sure, ritual gestures and offerings are made to the gods, as though a show of reverence might mitigate the offence. It's the hubris of human presumption to rewrite the rules in their own favour. When Odysseus returns, the damage is already done, and the signs are ominous. The sky darkens. But, after a while, it clears again, and the ship is able to leave the island, there being no immediate sign of retribution. For a brief moment, it may even appear that they have escaped it. Eurylochus is looking pretty clever. Perhaps he should be in charge. But the structure of the world they inhabit does not work that way. The response comes at sea. Without warning, the sky darkens again, and the calm that had allowed their departure is replaced by sudden violence. The typhoon that hits them is ferocious and precise. The ship is shattered, men are thrown into the water, their fate sealed, not by chance, but by the consequences of a decision that had already been made. The only survivor is Odysseus, desperately clinging to the debris. From this point on, the journey changes once again. What lies ahead is no longer about leading others home. It is about whether Odysseus himself can complete the path that remains. Chapter 16. Calypso. After the destruction of his ship and the loss of his crew, Odysseus is no longer a commander, nor even a traveller in the usual sense. The long chain of events that began at Troy has stripped away everything that once defined his journey. What remains is not a fleet, nor a mission shared with others, but a single man, carried helplessly forward by circumstance rather than direction. It is in this state that he washes up on the island of Ogygia. Isolated, distant, and set apart from the world he has known, it is a place that does not present itself as a threat. Even its location is less certain than all the other places we've visited. Here, there are no immediate dangers, no visible trials to overcome, and no sense of urgency imposed upon those who arrive. Instead, it offers something very different: stillness. Here resides Calypso, a nymph, herself exiled there for supporting her father, the Titan Atlas, during the war against Zeus, in an age long before humans. Lonely herself, she does not confront Odysseus as an enemy, nor test him in the ways he has come to expect. She offers him shelter, companionship, and a life removed from the uncertainty and loss that have defined his journey thus far. At first, this appears to be a kind of resolution. After so many dangers, so many failures, and so much exhaustion, the absence of struggle carries its own appeal. There is no immediate need to act, no decision that must be made, no threat that demands response. So many men lost, so much destruction. For what? Time, in this place, seems to loosen its hold. But what Calypso offers goes beyond rest. She offers permanence. She offers him the chance to remain, not for a season, not until the winds change, but indefinitely. More than that, she offers him a form of existence that removes the limits he has lived within. He need not age, need not struggle, need not face the uncertainties that lie beyond the horizon. He may stay, and in staying, he may leave behind everything that has brought him here. Odysseus accepts her hospitality. In reality, he has little choice. Refusing a goddess would be a bad move. The custom of Xenia demands his compliance and gratitude. Nymphs, especially smitten ones, have a reputation for being, shall we say, feisty. We already saw what Circe was capable of. So he holds his tongue. He shares her company and her bed. Xenia, don't you know? But he remains tormented. By day he sits at the edge of the shore, looking outward, weeping, for the men he has failed and the home he has lost, for the queen who now surely is just as wrinkled as he, but who knows his deepest thoughts, and for whose tender embrace he craves beyond anything else. The island's serenity eventually becomes maddening. The love of a goddess and her promises of youth and immortality, irresistible at first, contrast with the failures, loss, and the very physical signs of mortality. It makes home seem even more precious for being so fleeting. Yet still he remains. This is the tension that defines this chapter of the story. Odysseus is not held in chains, but neither is he free. What Circe had offered was delay, a pause in the journey, a temporary removal from its demands. What Calypso offers is something else entirely, an end to the journey itself. And this ultimately is what separates this place from all that has come before. For the first time, Odysseus is not being tested by what threatens him, but by what asks nothing of him at all. Time passes, not marked by events, but by repetition. The rhythm of the island does not change, and in that constancy, something else begins to take shape. A question. What remains of a man when nothing is required of him? Is there a threshold where Xenia becomes a curse? Odysseus does not answer it directly, but his actions suggest something of the answer. He just cannot seem to acclimatize. Grief and longing are more powerful than paradise. Finally, even the gods themselves are moved to tears. The more so because of the plight of long-suffering Penelope and Telemachus back home. The abuse of Xenia by parasitic intruders on Ithaca, an inversion to what Odysseus is experiencing, must not go unpunished. Athena, ever sympathetic to Odysseus for his piety and intelligence, intercedes. Instructions are given, materials are provided, and after 7 long years, Calypso, though heartbroken, and it should be said, now with a couple of his kids tugging at her skirt, does not prevent his departure. I know, it's complicated. Let's not get judgy. Anyway, Odysseus departs once more, alone upon the sea, carrying with him not strength nor certainty, but something quieter. Chapter 17. The Phaeacians. When Odysseus leaves the island of Calypso, he does so on a raft built with his own hands. There is no crew, no shared burden, and no illusion that the journey ahead will be anything other than uncertain. For a brief moment, all seems well. The sea is calm, the wind steady, and the direction clear. It's almost too good to be true. And it is. Because Poseidon is not one to forgive easily. The sea, gentle and compliant, turns savage. It breaks against his fragile vessel, undoing in moments what he has carefully constructed. The raft is destroyed. Odysseus is thrown back into the water. He is carried by the sea, sustained as much by persistence as by anything else, until at last he is cast upon yet another shore. This is the land of the Phaeacians. Mercifully, he is discovered not by warriors or cannibals, but by a pretty young woman, Nausicaa, whose response to him is not fear, nor hostility, but pity. She sees not a threat, but a stranger in need, and in doing so, she restores something that has been missing from much of the journey. Xenia, in its appropriate form. Through her, Odysseus is brought into the household of her father, the king. There he is received with the full measure of hospitality that the ancient world demanded. Yet, even here, hospitality is not entirely uncomplicated. The Phaeacians are not naive people. They live close to the edge of the unknown sea, and strangers do not simply arrive without consequence. Odysseus is welcomed, yes, but cautiously, watched carefully, measured before he is fully embraced. In truth, this perhaps makes their hospitality more meaningful, not less. They are not people untouched by fear. They are people who choose civilization despite it. He is fed, clothed, sheltered, and treated with dignity before any question is ever asked of who he is or where he comes from. but the boundaries are not observed perfectly. Questions come too early. Curiosity presses against etiquette. Odysseus himself notices the tension immediately. These are not monsters like the Cyclopes, nor savage destroyers like the Laestrigonians, but neither are they entirely free from suspicion. Their Xenia is genuine, yet human, imperfect, and still unfolding. Odysseus does not immediately reveal himself. His trauma has left him cautious. This is something new. Throughout his journey, he has often been defined by his identity, by the need to be known, to be recognized, by the pursuit of Kleos. It was becoming obvious that, in his case, heroics occasionally seemed to backfire, so he remains silent. Until dinner, in the king's great hall, when a local bard steps up to sing a flowery poem about the Trojan War. Odysseus begins to weep. All eyes turn to him. The music stops. He stands up, introduces himself, and asks if the king would hear the way it really happened. The story is told in all its tragic detail, warts and all. The hall is stunned. Earlier, some among the Phaeacians had treated him almost like a curiosity, an unknown wanderer to be tested in games and measured against their own young athletes. Strictly speaking, this is bad form, but now, as he breaks into tears, the room changes. The stranger before them is no longer merely a castaway. He is a man who has suffered beyond anything most of them can even imagine. And in that moment, their hospitality reaches its fullest expression. Not merely feeding the stranger, not merely sheltering him, but recognizing his humanity. He then asks if they would hear his own story after the war was over. Even the servants clamour to hear. The Phaeacians are moved to tears. The king orders his royal flagship, an entire squadron, to escort him home, laden with gifts, the finest linen and all the luxuries he could spare. After all, Odysseus has now woven the Phaeacians into his epic story. Xenia must be honoured, and in this story they will now rank as the greatest among hosts. The Phaeacian navy carries him home. When Odysseus at last arrives in Ithaca, it is not in triumph, nor even in awareness. He is asleep. It is a quiet return, almost understated in its execution. There are no celebrations, no immediate recognition, no moment of release after everything that has come before. Instead, he is placed upon the shore, his belongings set beside him, and left to wake in the land he has spent so long trying to reach, while the Phaeacians depart in silent reverence. When he does awaken, there is a moment of uncertainty. He's unsure if it's just a dream, so he waits. He knows that to be recognized is not always an advantage. A mysterious stranger now appears, and clothes him as a beggar, urging caution and to watch and wait before he acts. The stranger, we are told, is Athena in disguise. She vanishes, and Odysseus looks toward his castle and his home. Chapter 18. Telemachus Returns. When young Telemachus left Ithaca, he did so with more uncertainty than purpose. His home was in turmoil. The suitors had taken hold. His mother was under constant pressure, and his own position was increasingly precarious. He was no longer a child, but neither was he recognized as a man with authority. Speaking out against the disorder drew scorn. He lacked the weight to make it matter, and now, as he was coming of age, There were rumours they wanted to dispose of him. So he snuck out of Ithaca both for safety but also to seek news of his father. His first stop was Pylos, where he was received by King Nestor. There, for the first time, he saw a household that still functioned as it should. The rituals were observed. Guests were welcomed properly. Authority was neither questioned nor ignored. It was not a matter of force, but of structure, something Ithaca had quietly lost. His host was impressed by Telemachus's manners, despite the trauma of his upbringing. But King Nestor had little news for him. He had left Troy quickly, more desperate for home than for the spoils of war. The peace of his realm seemed to reflect that blessing. He suggested Telemachus travel to Sparta, to the court of King Menelaus. Surely he would have news. Menelaus had also successfully returned from Troy. Not quickly, and not without difficulty, but he had returned. His house still stood. His position had held. Queen Helen, as much a victim as the cause of the war, was back at his side. She seemed serene and lovely, despite the carnage wrought in her name. The couple appeared genuinely reconciled. They were getting ready for a family wedding. Telemachus told of his plight back on Ithaca, rousing the rage of Menelaus and drawing his sympathy for the boy. He told him of his own brother's sorry tale and the similar path of vengeance that his nephew was now pursuing. You see, King Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief of the Greek forces in Troy, had come home as a victor only to be killed in his own house. His authority, once questioned, had not protected him from what waited in his absence. The danger had not been on the battlefield, but within his own walls. His own wife trapped him in his bath and did him in, with the help of his conniving cousin. For Telemachus the implication was clear. But the king went on. Odysseus is alive. Held, delayed, but not gone. His whereabouts were uncertain, but his ongoing exploits throughout the Mediterranean were already becoming legendary. Telemachus now leaves for home, not exactly with the news he had hoped for, but with the resolve and courage that pulsed through his veins with a renewed sense of purpose. Something told him his time had now come. Fate would guide him, and justice would be done, one way or the other. Back on Ithaca, the suitors were getting nervous, unsure if Telemachus would return with an army or on his own. So they sent out ships to intercept him and hopefully snuff out the royal house of Atreus once and for all. Without an heir, Penelope would have no choice but to remarry. But Telemachus does not return in the same way he left. Somewhere along the journey, he has learned to listen more carefully, to reports, to warnings, to the pattern of events around him. He adjusts his course, avoiding the expected trap, and makes landfall away from the harbour where the ambush had been laid. It seems our young prince was a chip off the old block. To survive, let alone win, he would have to rely on cunning, something both his mother and father had in spades. When he comes ashore, he heads straight for the hut of his father's most loyal servant, Eumaeus. Once a king, now a lonely swineherd, but a man of character and integrity that betrays a more noble ancestry than he would ever divulge. He would be safe there. As luck would have it, or perhaps by design, another man is already there, a stranger, in rags, enjoying a modest breakfast under the rules of hospitality that not even swineherds were exempt from. As Telemachus embraces his host, he greets the stranger and then goes on to discuss his own recent adventures and tentative plans. Odysseus listens quietly. Suddenly, Eumaeus is called away to the castle, leaving the two alone. Odysseus decides the time is right to reveal his identity, and Telemachus is taken aback. When Odysseus went off to war, he was just an infant, with no memory of his father. All he had was stories and inflated legends, an image of a warrior larger than life, glowing with Kleos. But what stood before him now was a beggar, aged and greying, sinewy and sullen, hardly what he expected, so he hesitates. But as Odysseus tells his story of the time before the war and its tragic aftermath, Telemachus knows it must be him. The penny drops. They embrace, shed tears, but time is of the essence. Plans must be put in motion before they are discovered. Odysseus suggests Telemachus returns to the palace to face them and show up the suitors as failures right to their faces. That will keep them off balance, and in the meantime, Odysseus will see to it that other supporters move in to protect him. As for himself, the best way is to remain incognito and call upon the royal court to show Xenia to a humble beggar, and so give him time to assess and plan their revenge. Chapter 19. Beggar in his own house. The palace itself has not changed in any obvious way. The structure stands as it always has. The land around it is still recognizable, the outward appearance largely intact. But within it, the order that once governed the household has evaporated. The suitors occupy the space as though it belongs to them. They eat from its stores, drink its wine, and move freely through the halls without restraint, molesting the servants and leaving the place in filth. What had once been regulated by custom and decorum is abused without limit. Odysseus enters without drawing attention, passing by his old hunting dog Argus, emaciated and frail, who has been standing guard all these long years, awaiting the return of his master. Instantly recognizing and yelping with joy at the sight of him, despite the disguise, the loyal old hound's heart gives out, and he dies in his master's arms, happy. Truly man's best friend. As a beggar, Odysseus is received not as a figure of importance, but as someone to be tolerated or dismissed, depending on the mood of those present, and he remains at the periphery of the court hall. This position allows him to see clearly. He watches how the suitors behave, toward one another, toward the servants, and toward the house itself. He sees where authority has been ignored, who the ringleaders are, and assesses how best to use the environment and in what order to take them out. There are moments of direct contact. None recognize him. Most mock him, throwing scraps his way, even forcing a fight with another beggar, just for sport. An outrageous abuse of Xenia. The presence of the stranger draws notice from behind the main hall. Penelope hears that a man has arrived who claims to have travelled widely. Always desperate for news from afar, she has him brought to her chamber. He does not reveal himself. Instead, he confirms that Odysseus lives and will no doubt return, just to gauge her response. Unsure, she hesitates, but there is something in this stranger's account that differs from the others. We can only assume that Athena herself prevented his being recognized. Chapter 20. The Bow. Something in the house now begins to change. The suitors become more agitated. Penelope, ever the perfect match for Odysseus in cunning, agrees it's finally time. She'll set a contest. Another chat with the stranger gives her the perfect idea. The mighty bow of Odysseus is brought out, kept unused since his departure, known only to a few in the household. It is not an ordinary weapon, being made of ibex horn. It requires not just strength but familiarity. It is something that cannot easily be taken up by another. The challenge is simple in its form. Whoever can string the bow and send an arrow cleanly through a line of axe heads set in a row will be the man she accepts, for he will be most like her husband in prowess. No other would be worthy. The proposal is met with cheers, but these men are not veterans of Troy, or for that matter any other war. They were not made of the same stuff, though they puffed themselves up as though they were. When the bow is delivered, one by one, the suitors step up, and fail even to string the rigid implement. They persist, attempting all sorts of fanciful techniques and ideas. Over 50 of them soon stood frustrated and humiliated. Throughout this, Odysseus remains where he has been, in the shadows, watching. Then he steps forward, speaks, and asks for the bow. The chamber erupts in laughter. The request comes from a man who has been ignored, mocked, and treated as an object of little value. There is no reason, in their view, to grant his request. Telemachus intervenes. He insists. Rules are rules. The moment is a quiet one, but significant. Telemachus does not raise his voice, nor attempt to force the situation, but he holds his ground. The authority he lacked before his journey has begun to take shape. It is not absolute, but for this one moment it is enough. The bow is brought to Odysseus. He takes it without haste, looking over it tenderly, like an old heirloom. There is no display, no effort to draw attention. The movement is familiar, practiced, carried out without strain. Where others had struggled, he does not. The bow is strung as it always was meant to be. Jaws drop, but he goes on. He sets an arrow, lets fly. No hesitation. The shot passes cleanly through the line of axe heads, precise, controlled, and effortless. In the ensuing silence, Telemachus comes by his side. Other loyal servants seal the doors to the chamber and draw alongside them, with a cache of weapons. From the floor of the chamber there is a wave of panic, excuses, and then pleading. But Odysseus is deaf with rage. Justice is about to be served, both human and divine. No more cunning, just Kleos, martial prowess of the grandest scale. Achilles himself would be proud. Today Telemachus too would become a man, and the son of a king, venting the full fury of his long humiliation as they cut their way through the enemy. This was father and son bonding, old school. When it was over, the servants scrambled to clean up the mess. Penelope had been in her chamber the whole time, in a deep sleep of no ordinary making, and when she awakes and is told her husband had returned, she refuses to believe it. The man standing before her is nothing like her husband. He was somehow different. She had been fixated on her memory for so long that, like Telemachus, this man just seemed completely at odds with. As if the archery test were not enough, she now gave Odysseus another test, one only he and she knew of, to discern the nature of their marital bed, one he had made from a living olive tree that she loved when they were newlyweds. The scales dropped from her eyes when the recognition finally hit her. Odysseus was home. But anyone who knows even a little bit about how Greek myths go will know that there's rarely ever a happy ending, at least in the way we're all used to in fairy tales. You see, there were an awful lot of suitors who were sent to Hades that day, which meant there were an equal number of neighbouring kingdoms that would soon be out for revenge. As luck would have it, Athena once again intervenes and imposes a peace deal. To us, that seems like a cop-out, but to the ancient Greeks, where personal honour and family blood feuds were the norm, Athena's intervention represents the imposition of superior wisdom, to end conflict for the greater good. Some believe it demonstrates the growing recognition that there must be laws to regulate human conduct, especially where grievance by both sides is legitimate. Indeed, over the coming centuries, the Greeks would go on to encode such a system of laws to maintain order among men, which arguably also served to distance them even further from regulation by the whims of gods. The philosopher Nietzsche had something to say about that. One final act now remained for Odysseus, to appease Poseidon by taking an oar, symbolic of his whole journey so far, and travel inland until he found a people who didn't recognize it for what it was. Here he was to build Poseidon a temple, and the god would finally be placated. Sure enough, it came to pass as he was told, and Odysseus could finally rest easy, knowing his house was safe and his trials were finally over. So, what can we say about Odysseus, his remarkable journey, and why this story has been so resonant with readers through the millennia? To children, the story is full of adventure, frightening creatures, and heroic exploits. The appeal is obvious. But when you step back from it, when you look not just at the grand adventure, but at what it required, you begin to see deeper layers of meaning. Odysseus does not simply struggle to get home. He struggles to become the kind of man who can. At the beginning, he is already remarkable, clever, capable, resourceful. But he is also something else: impulsive, proud, quick to act, and just as quick to reveal himself. And again, it is not the world that delays him. It is himself that's to blame. He caves in when he should be firm. He lingers where he should leave. He speaks when he should remain silent. He takes what he should refuse. He trusts when he should question, and questions when he should trust. The journey is not simply a test of endurance, it is a process of correction. Each stage strips something away. Among the Lotus Eaters, he learns that a man can forget his purpose long before he loses his way. With the Cyclops, he learns that victory means little if it is followed by self-exposure and risk of harm to those who depend on you. With Circe, he learns that comfort can delay a man as effectively as any storm. With Calypso, he is offered something far more dangerous still, not delay, but escape. A life without consequence, and he refuses it, eventually. By the time he returns, he is no longer the man who left, not because he has become stronger, but because he has become more controlled. He no longer needs to be famous. He no longer confuses action with effectiveness. He waits, and in that waiting, something has changed. But Odysseus is not the only one who has travelled. Telemachus has made a different journey, not across seas, but into understanding. He learns what a house looks like when it is ordered, and what happens when it is not. He learns that absence creates consequences, and that those consequences do not resolve themselves. He returns not with answers, but with awareness, and for a young man, maybe that is enough. Then there is Penelope, She neither leaves nor fights. She does not transform in the way the others do. She endures. In a house that has lost its structure, she maintains it, not by force, but by intelligence, restraint, and timing. She delays collapse long enough for something else to intervene. If Odysseus learns how to return, and Telemachus learns how to stand, then Penelope shows what it means to hold on. And together, they form something more complete than any one of them alone. But even then, the story does not end cleanly. The suitors fall, the house is restored, the king returns, and still, the consequences remain. Because that is something the Greeks understood very well, that the consequences of actions do not disappear simply because they are justified, that cycles do not end because one side believes itself to be right, that order does not restore itself without cost, and the cost is often heavy. At the end of the story, peace does not emerge naturally. It is imposed, not by men, but by Athena, by wisdom. Later, the Greeks would build systems to do this for themselves. Courts, laws, judgment. We learn that, left to ourselves, we do not always know when to stop, or how much is enough. So what then are we meant to take from this? This is a remarkable story because its hero is far from perfect, and yet, when things go wrong, and they will, he continues to endure, sometimes against all logic and all reason. That's something the gods admire, and men themselves reward with immortality. Supplementary chapter. A final note on maps. Before we leave this story entirely, there is one final question that has followed it for centuries. Where did all of this actually happen? For as long as people have told the story of Odysseus, they have tried to place it on a map. Scholars, sailors, historians, each attempting to trace his route across the Mediterranean, to identify the island of Circe, the cave of the Cyclops, the strait of Scylla and Charybdis, and the distant shore of Calypso. And to a point, some of it fits. The early stages of the journey follow recognizable geography, from Troy to the Aegean to the wider Mediterranean world. From the Rock of Gibraltar to the Black Sea, certain locations have long been associated with real places: Sicily, the Italian coast, the islands of the Central Sea. Yet consensus has been notoriously difficult. Even in ancient times, the geographer Strabo once joked that it would be easier to find the cobbler who stitched Aeolus' bag of winds together than to identify the true locations of Odysseus's wanderings. Perhaps that ambiguity is itself the point. The Odyssey unfolds in a world suspended between memory, sailors' tales, Bronze Age geography, and mythic imagination. Let's have a brief look at some of the more famous ones. Let's begin with the land of the Cimmerians, in which Odysseus enters the Underworld. The Romans believed it was at Lake Avernus near Naples. Many ancient Greeks believed it was near Cape Taenarum at the end of the Peloponnese. Herodotus thought it was on the Acheron River in Epirus, near modern-day Corfu. Some modern theorists think it was at the Rock of Gibraltar, or even on Spain's eastern shore, while others believe the Cimmerians themselves were an ancient tribe on the western shore of the Black Sea. The Laestrigonians have also caused some controversy, with theories of their fabled stronghold of Telepelos ranging from Mani on the Peloponnese to the Italian city of Formia, or any other number of towns in Sicily, even to the Croatian pirate stronghold of Omiš, or the Balearic port city of Maon. These are joined by the occasional, shall we say, alternative history buffs, who have even proposed a cross-Atlantic Odyssey, with Havana in Cuba being their city of choice. Many of these fringe theories also include Calypso's island of Ogygia on either the western or eastern Atlantic coasts. Make of that what you will. The islands of Malta and Gozo have similarly been thought of as places where either Calypso lived, or that one or other of them were the mysterious island of Thrinacia, where the golden cattle of Helios resided. Malta certainly has a very ancient, even pre-Bronze Age history. The Phaeacian homeland of Scheria is also one that comes under scrutiny. There is an ancient tradition that it is the island of Corfu, and yet many have argued that an island and population so close to his homeland of Ithaca would be well known to Odysseus. Many modern scholars therefore think that Scheria is a fictional society, a symbolic last refuge before returning home. It's worth pointing out, though, that many locations seem to cluster around southern Italy and Sicily, regions later heavily colonized by the Greeks, which does suggest a much more localized folklore and a blurring of myth and colonization. What's clear is that Homer's geography is not consistent in the modern cartographic sense. Readers often get caught up in the story as if it were a nautical captain's log. If we just solve the map, we solve the Odyssey. But what's worth noting is that the further the journey goes, the less precise the map seems to become. Distances stretch, directions blur, places begin to feel less like destinations and more like thresholds. Even in the ancient world, there were those who questioned whether the journey could be mapped at all. Because the truth is, this is not a voyage recorded by a navigator. It is a story shaped by memory, by sailors' tales, by fragments of distant lands, by encounters half understood, and by the human tendency to place the unknown just beyond the edge of what is known. The world of the Odyssey sits on that boundary, partly real, partly imagined. A Mediterranean you can at once recognize, but one that gradually becomes something else. And perhaps that is exactly the point, because the further Odysseus travels, the less the world behaves like a map, and the more it begins to behave like experience. A place where direction matters less than decision, where distance is measured not in miles, but in mistakes, and where the path forward is shaped not by certainty, but by response. So, yes, there are maps, many of them, some careful, some even convincing, all attempting to bring order to a journey that resists it. But in the end, the question is not just where Odysseus went, it is what the journey required of him, and why, after nearly 3,000 years, we are still trying to follow it. I do hope you take the time to read the story for yourself, and may your own Nostos be a successful one. Till next time.